Visceral fat is arguably the most dangerous fat on your body, and the sad part is most people don't even know how much of it they have. It's hard to tell. It's located deep inside your stomach, surrounding your liver, pancreas, and other organs, and it's a lot more harmful than the squishy belly fat you can pinch with your fingers. One thing I realized over the last 10 years of coaching, and I've worked with over 1,000 guys, is that very few knew how bad visceral fat truly is. And this is why I decided to make this video. I want to go over why visceral fat is so dangerous, what causes it to accumulate, how to check if you have too much visceral fat, and then what the latest research says on the best ways to get rid of it. So why is visceral fat so dangerous, and why is everyone suddenly talking about it? The main reason is because visceral fat doesn't just idly sit in your stomach. It acts more like an organ. It has high blood flow and it releases inflammatory chemicals called cytokines, causing systemic inflammation. Large studies show that people with high visceral fat have about 60% higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes, and also raise the risk of heart disease by 20 to 30% independent of your body weight. But it doesn't stop there. Most people don't know this, but high visceral fat is also linked with cognitive decline. Studies connect visceral fat with reducing blood flow to the brain and shrinking areas involving memory and emotional regulation. And if that's not enough to convince you to take this seriously, several large studies also link visceral fat with a variety of cancers. So across the board, visceral fat looks like one of the worst things you can carry. But what even causes this type of fat to accumulate? Well, research shows there are 6 major factors linked to excess visceral fat. The first one is sleep disruption. In one Mayo Clinic study, just 2 weeks of sleep deprivation led to an 11% increase in visceral fat, even though body weight barely changed. And this was measured with a CT scan, so it was very precise. And look, I know everyone talks about getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep, and I understand firsthand how difficult that can be. I just had my second daughter a few months ago, and honestly, sleep is still an issue. It's not always possible to get enough hours, but we should all be actively working on it. The second factor affecting visceral fat gain are your stress levels. People with chronically high cortisol levels often carry more visceral fat even at the same weight. I see this with my clients who are in their 40s and 50s and have a lot of responsibilities with work and family. Poor sleep and stress are the worst offenders that cause visceral fat to accumulate much faster. The data here is observational, but the trend is clear. And if you're in that situation and you would like to get my help to get your health back on track, check the first link in the description. Alcohol is another big factor. Daily drinkers have significantly more visceral and liver fat than non-drinkers. That's another strong reason to get rid of alcohol. Drinking is a habit I personally abandoned in my 20s, and I never looked back. And then there are types of foods you eat and how that affects visceral fat. In what's called the lipogain study, participants were given muffins made either from saturated fat or polyunsaturated fat. Both groups gained the same amount of weight, but the saturated fat group stored about twice as much visceral fat, and I'll touch more on food choices a bit later in the video. Now, another factor is activity. You can take 2 40-year-old men who weigh the same, eat the same, sleep the same, but the guy who's sedentary will have a significantly higher amount of visceral fat than his active friend. Actually, regular exercise can burn off visceral fat even if you don't lose any weight. And finally, genetics and demographics also matter. Large population studies show that Asian, Indian, and Hispanic groups often carry more visceral fat at lower BMIs. So while calories and macros and hitting the like button will always be the main drivers of losing or gaining weight, these factors explain why you can have 2 people who weigh the same and eat about the same amount of calories but have very different amounts of visceral fat. Now, the big question is, does this affect you? How do you know if you have too much visceral fat? Because the tricky part is that it's not like belly fat. You can't easily see it in the mirror, and the only way to get a very precise measurement would be with an MRI or a CT scan. But while those are most accurate, they're also expensive, time-consuming, and not very practical. DEXA scans and ultrasound can give you a reliable estimate, though not as precise as an MRI or a CT, but again, just not very practical if you want a quick assessment. Now, the good news is you can get a reasonable estimate of your risk at home without any special equipment. And the easiest way to do that is to look at your waist to height ratio. You take a tape, you measure your waist right at the belly button, you do this without sucking in your stomach and right after you breathe out. Then you take that number and divide it by your height. If the result is above 0.5, you're likely carrying too much visceral fat. Now, this method also has its limitations. Waist to height ratio doesn't account for things like how much muscle you have or your bone structure. Someone with a lot of muscle around their midsection might get a false positive and score above 0.5 even if they're not carrying a lot of visceral fat. Another way to check is to just look at your waist circumference. For men, a waist above 40 inches or 102 centimeters is a red flag. For women, the cutoff is 35 inches or 88 centimeters. And if both of those checks are pointing in the wrong direction, that is a clear sign to take this seriously. Now, what can you do to lose visceral fat as soon as possible? Well, there's some really good news here because visceral fat is actually one of the first to be burnt off, and the research shows that you don't need anything extreme to do it. The first thing that's very effective is modifying your diet. And I'm not just talking about creating a calorie deficit and tracking your macros. Those things are important, but there are also specific foods that you can add to your diet that will help you reduce visceral fat faster. And this is what we've seen in a recent study. A polyphenol-rich Mediterranean diet resulted in losing more than twice the amount of visceral fat compared to a regular Mediterranean diet, and both groups in the study lost roughly the same amount of weight. The group that lost double the amount of visceral fat was getting an extra 800 milligrams per day of polyphenols. They were also told to avoid red and processed meat. The extra polyphenols came from 3 to 4 cups of green tea and a Mankai green shake. So it's not just about how many calories you eat, it's also where your calories come from. The other area that has some very interesting research on losing visceral fat is exercise. So we all know that resistance training is the key to retaining muscle as you lose weight and building a great physique, but there's also a form of walking that you can combine with lifting to help you lose visceral fat even faster. And this walking method has gotten a lot of attention recently. It's a form of interval walking which went viral under the name Japanese walking method. Basically, you alternate between 3 minutes of faster walking and 3 minutes of going easier. You do this for 30 to 60 minutes at least 4 times per week. For the fast interval, you should be breathing hard to a point where it's difficult to hold a conversation, and for the easy interval, it should be about 3 out of 10 on the exertion scale so you can recover to go fast again. And I'm a really big fan of walking in general. It's joint friendly, you can do it outside, you can do it on a treadmill, you can make it convenient with an under the desk walking pad, and I personally get about 10,000 steps per day. And since I read about the interval walking method, I incorporate it a few times per week because it's a simple upgrade to the existing walking routine, and I highly recommend it. And when it comes to getting rid of visceral fat and belly fat in general, I think it's important to keep in mind that you don't need any extremes. You need consistency with habits like walking, lifting 3 to 4 times per week, cleaning up your diet, paying attention to your macros, and sleeping a bit more. It's nothing flashy, but it's the fundamentals done consistently for a long time that deliver 90% of the results. The key is to create a sustainable lifestyle change. Your old lifestyle is the reason you have too much visceral and belly fat to begin with, and now you need to create a new lifestyle that will fix that. And it really doesn't take that long to get rid of visceral fat if you commit to the process. If you adjust your food choices, you pay attention to your diet, you incorporate some of the interval walking on a regular basis, you will see great results in the next 30 days. And by the way, if you're interested in coaching with me to get help with this, the link is in the description below. For more advice on how to get rid of belly fat, check out this video next, and I will see you right there.